We are back with another episode of Gatehouse Insights. And today, I'm joined by Annemarie, a principal lawyer at Slater Gordon. She's going to touch on her journey at Slater's and how she transitioned from senior associate to principal lawyer within 4 years, how she transitioned from commercial law to personal injury law, the challenges she's faced along the way, the key habits of a highly effective lawyer, and much, much more. Make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So I want to really begin today with your role at and your journey at Slater's, because you started there off as a lawyer and you've progressed into a principal lawyer. So could you share a little bit about that journey with us?
Yes, of course. So I started with Slater Gordon in 2010 as a senior associate. I'd never worked in personal injury law, so it was a real, I suppose, change in what I'd done previously, and it wasn't easy because I didn't have that exposure to personal injury law, so the clients were very different from what I was used to in a sort of commercial firm or acting for the defendants, and also just progressing from senior associate to principal lawyer wasn't easy. It wasn't just a matter of time. It really was a matter of honing my skills, building my profile, I suppose, escalating some business acumen and proving actually to the national executive who has to approve such a promotion that I had improved in those areas, I guess, learned from feedback because I wasn't accepted at my first go. It did take 4 years from the time of being a senior associate and beginning with Slater Gordon to get to that principal lawyer stage. And what I learned from that really was to, when someone tells you perhaps you're not ready, that to really embrace that feedback and take it constructively and to build on it. And I did find that I improved in all of those areas by taking on that feedback and honing my skills, as I say, becoming more of a specialist, which is a key difference I found between a commercial litigation type scenario and what I'm doing now in what can be referred to as a personal injury space. Realising that it's not just a matter of being a good technical lawyer, that in order to be a principal lawyer, you need to, of course, have a business perspective, think about the business of law, and also, of course, mentoring staff. So that was a little bit about my journey, and so since 2014 I have been a principal lawyer at Slater Gordon, and there is quite a lot of responsibility that goes with it, in addition to that specialisation, but of course with supervising lawyers, junior lawyers, medium range lawyers, and also support staff.
Now, because in 2002, prior to that, you were working in a commercial law firm. What made you transition into a personal injury firm?
Well, it's interesting, Louise. One really needs to take advantage of opportunities. So what happened to me is the GFC. So in 2009, I came back from a beautiful holiday from America, and unfortunately the commercial law firm that I worked for had lost one of its major insurer clients. And so I was actually made redundant, and that never happened to me before. It was a shock to the system. I felt it wasn't my fault that, the insurer went elsewhere, but unfortunately that's how the cards fell. And what I actually did is I actually approached opponents that I had experiences with. We weren't friends. We were really just colleagues, professional colleagues, I suppose, but vigorously, debating with one another. And I was actually offered a job, and that job was at Slater Gordon. And as I say, I'd never done personal injury law before, but my former opponent, I guess, saw something in me, and I just seized the opportunity, and I've been there ever since 2010.
That's awesome, because a lot of lawyers, they think once they've had so many years experience in law, they can't do a different area of law, they can't change, but you're proof that it can be done.
Absolutely. And look, it wasn't easy. You just have to really expose yourself, I suppose. And at that time, I was a senior associate, and I guess exposing oneself to say, well, I don't know this, and asking questions and learning an entirely new area from having been, the go-to person, I suppose, in the other realm. It isn't easy, but it certainly is rewarding. And, if you can open yourself, that again is opening yourself to opportunities and embracing change and learning from those opportunities. So certainly, when we train in law school, we don't train to be a specific type of lawyer. We learn how to learn the law. And I think that's what we have to remember, that we really do have those skills that make us fairly flexible, I guess, to move into one area to another. And in fact, learning the area that I'm in now has made me realise that if I wanted to go into another area, that I could do that as well. So it actually has given me the confidence to do that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that back in 2009, you were made redundant.
Yes.
And in 2020, I'm sure there would have been many lawyers that have also been made redundant and had found them in that position where they've lost their job. What advice or words of wisdom would you give them that you wish you had back in 2009?
Well, I actually was given a piece of advice, which at the time I thought it was just verbiage, just what you say to someone who's been made redundant. And that advice was given to me by the HR person who delivered the news to me that I was to be made redundant. And the advice was, Annemarie, one door closes, the other door opens. And I really thought that was just cliche, but I have learnt from that piece of advice, it really is true, but you need to back yourself. You need to take advantage of your skills. You need to have confidence in yourself and just put yourself out there and seize the opportunities that may present themselves. So keep moving forward, one step in front of the other. And, at that time, I did think that being a lawyer was a great job, but wasn't my whole identity. And it was a challenge to me to understand that actually being a lawyer is part of my identity. I didn't really actually appreciate that before the redundancy. So there are a lot of emotions, I suppose, that go through a person's mind when that happens. But just remember, it's actually a beginning, not an end. And it's a new chapter where you can move into a different area. You can learn from it. You can grow. So I would say that was actually, whilst it sounded, as I say, as just something pleasant-ish to say, that it was actually correct and good advice, but you need to embrace it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you've, moving from senior associate to principal lawyer in a whole different new area of law, it was hard and it was challenging. Could you share some of those challenges you faced with that transition and that progress?
Well, one was not knowing the area. So driving to work and thinking, I think I know this, but then looking at a file, I actually no. So just learning, and also learning from less experienced people was also a bit of a challenge, and asking questions which you might feel as a senior lawyer, perhaps you should know that. But yeah, so that was for me the main challenge, the learning, and to ensure that I did read, going back to basics, read all the cases, read the articles. It just, that was really the main thing for me, just to learn a new area, and to appreciate that I can learn from all sorts of other people, because I was actually being trained by a very senior law clerk. So that kind of, I suppose, imbalance seemed a bit peculiar, having come from a situation where I was a manager of people. So again, just, I guess, not letting ego stand in the way, and going back to those basic principles of learning your craft.
With your transition from commercial law to personal injury, what have you found to be the major differences between firm environments or even the type of work? What have you found to be different there?
One of the primary differences is the type of client. So in my experience being at a commercial firm, I didn't actually have to be empathetic. I didn't really have to care that much as long as about the client, which sounds a little bit odd, but as long as I was doing an excellent work, for example, at drafting the documents and saving money for the client, that kind of thing, I was doing my job. But in personal injury law, it's not only being excellent at the technical work, but it's also the human factor. From my perspective, the key difference is the empathy and care and concern and compassion, the human element that is associated with being a personal injury lawyer, because on this side of the fence, as I see it, we're really impacting on people's lives. It's not just, getting a person, a financial outcome which will assist them. They're really coming to you at a particularly vulnerable time in their lives, which is not only affecting themselves but also their families and friends, etc. And it can mean the difference between a person being homeless and getting their dignity back. So that to me has been the key learning area, I suppose, and the primary difference between being a commercial lawyer or being a commercial litigation lawyer for, a major insurer or a major company, and dealing with an individual who's going through a really tough time. The other thing that I felt is a real difference is the manner of the writing. So when of course you're dealing with a sophisticated litigant, you don't need, you can use case law, you can sound really, really clever and, use lawyerly type language. But on this side of the fence, you have to be more conscious about your audience, and you have to be very clear and concise. And so, we use, for example, the pub test or the grandmother test. If you were writing to your migrant grandmother, would she understand what you're talking about? And I think that improving on those writing skills so that you are communicating clearly and so that the person understands and it's not just a fancy lawyer letter, has been another key difference that I found moving from one type of law firm environment to this one here. And also the degree of specialisation. I think they're the three key differences at Slater and Gordon. Everyone effectively is a specialist or is on their way to becoming a specialist in their area. So, it's really wonderful to be able to go to a workers' comp lawyer or, a motor accident, a TAC lawyer, and ask questions about their field, because that's their speciality. Whereas in a commercial litigation firm, I guess there is that, but it's more of a generalist area.
And from your experience, I mean, you're a highly effective lawyer. You've been able to progress from senior associate to principal lawyer in such a short period of time, and not knowing that particular area. But from your experience, what do you find are the skills that you need to be that highly effective and passionate lawyer that you are?
I think you have to have great attention to detail. I think there's no shortcuts, no excuses at all. I think that you have to learn from your mistakes. I think that you have to work well with others, remembering always that you're not alone. It is a team environment. I think you have to actively listen. I don't know that lawyers actively listen to their clients. So, for instance, one thing that I do is I don't take any notes initially, and I tell my clients, because often they do, I guess from their experience, expect lawyers to start scribbling down on paper or, banging at the keyboard. But I tell them I'm not going to do that, because if you're doing that, then you're not actively listening. So I listen first, and then we might go through similar questions but expand on them and then take notes and so forth. I would say communication is always a complaint that clients have had from the get-go, that lawyers don't communicate enough or effectively with clients. So make sure that you communicate with clients to the level that they expect. Let them know I'll be communicating with you, once a month, or even if I've got nothing to say, just to let you know that, your claim is progressing or whatever stage it's at, so that they know that their file is not collecting dust. Delegate. Learn to delegate, because you can't do everything yourself. And for a lot of lawyers, that's really hard because, of course, at law school, we're not typically made to work in a team. There is some group assignments, etc. But I don't think that we really are good at that sort of thing. So it doesn't necessarily come naturally. So to delegate. One of my key pet hates is micromanagement. So don't micromanage. Let the people learn. If you're being micromanaged, people aren't learning. Hear feedback graciously, which I said before, can be hard to do when you it can be a criticism, can be regarded as a criticism, but take it on board and try to learn from the feedback that you're being given. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to tell clients that you don't know the answer. Don't be afraid to challenge counsel. But find out what the answers are. And yeah, I think they're the main things that I'd say, Louise.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned earlier on in our talk is you put your ego aside, which I think really helps as well.
Yes, that's right. We are told, at secondary school, at high school, and even by getting a fabulous ATAR score, I guess we're told that we're kind of clever, but it's not enough. It really isn't enough. You need to, as I say, relate to people. You need to understand you don't know everything and to learn. So, and to get that constructive feedback. And when you get, back in the day when we used to get red pen over our drafts, there's a reason for that, because you don't know everything. So you learn.
Yeah. Now I want to move on to leadership, because you also manage a team. You manage and lead a team.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So tell us a little bit about this role and I suppose your type of leadership style, how you help your team advance, and also the skills you've picked up along the way in this position.
So much like those aspects of dealing with a personal injury lawyer, I've tried to transfer those qualities, I hope, to managing my team. So the first one and the biggest one, I think, is caring about them. Caring about them in their personal lives, what's going on in their personal lives. Obviously not in an intrusive way, just to be open to it, so that a person can come to you and say, hey, Annemarie, or whoever the leader is, I need some time off because this is going on in my life. That's fine. So just to be open to that, to caring, to, actually caring about your team, having empathy, being a role model. Don't expect them to do what you're not doing. So, I really hope that my team knows that, and feels that I really do roll up my sleeves and work hard, and I want them to do that too. But I want them to have downtime, and I want them to have fun at the workplace. So I think empathy, I think role model, being reliable, being approachable. I want them to know that if they make a mistake or if they don't know something, that I'm here and I'm here to help them. I'm not here to judge them, that I'm here to teach them. And being flexible. You and I were chatting before, Louise, about the potential new work arrangements with our COVID new normal. Some people want to work from home a few days. Some people don't want to work from home at all. And again, it's accommodating that. Obviously, our first priority is delivering the stellar service to the clients, but also just as important, we need to care about our staff. So I think if I could summarise it, I would say empathy, reliability, approachability, and flexibility. They would be, I suppose, the cornerstones of the way that I try to lead.
Yeah. Now, I suppose for lawyers that are wanting to reach that top level, that principal lawyer or partner level, what are some tips you would give them to help them achieve that and get there?
Take advantage of opportunities. So, a partner might come to you at the last minute to ask you to do something. You don't feel confident. You've got other things to do. Just do it, and just do it to the best of your ability, because the opportunities do not arise at the most convenient times. So that's the one key thing I would say, as well as always having attention to detail. Be commercially minded. As I said at the beginning, Louise, it's just not enough to be a good technician. That's expected. But you need to remember that it's a business. So you need to understand about priorities and time management. Being able to work in a team, which again, I don't believe that comes naturally for a lot of lawyers and law students. And you need to stand out. How do you stand out, from other law graduates who are just as clever and hardworking as you? You stand out, I guess, by taking advantage of opportunities, just putting yourself out there to get involved.
Yeah, that's good. And before we close, what's one piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think that's the main thing. Don't be afraid to ask questions. No one wants you to sit there being terrified to ask questions or because you feel you've made a mistake. Be accountable, and just ask, and but don't make the same mistake again. You need to learn from it, of course. So I think that is the main thing that I try to foster with my team, that I want them to tell me when they're not sure about something, or they're worried about something, or they've made a mistake. There's nothing that's fatal. We are doing very important work, but it's not life and death, and most things are fixable, if not everything. So just don't sit there terrified, drowning under it, stressing. Ask the question, fix it, learn from it.
And that's it. Another episode of Gatehouse Insights draws to an end. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel, where you can see more.